Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. And we turn now to one of the most anthologized little poems in all of the Leaves of Grass, a noiseless, patient spider. Now, I have given already a set of comments to a group of young high school students on this poem, and I'll include it in the comments box so that you can watch that. And my assumptions will be that you have already kind of paid attention to that set of comments so that I won't be repeating myself. Now, this is poem number 11 of the 18 of Whispers of Heavenly Death. For some readers of Leaves of Grass, this is their favorite poem. We can say out loud that if you just pick up Leaves of Grass and you read it from that very first word come, all the way through all the inscriptions, all the way up to and including this poem, this will be the last really popular, well-known poem of Leaves of Grass. What I find fascinating is that most of the time when this poem is discussed, as for example, I did it in an earlier lecture, I did not mention in that lecture that this is a poem that sits right in the middle of Whispers of Heavenly Death. We're going to have to maybe ask, why did Whitman decide to put this poem right where he put this poem? Now, our Nortons will give us some background information here, that this poem first appeared in Broadway Magazine, London, October 1868. The third of 5 numbered poems printed under the single title Whispers of Heavenly Death, which survived as the title of the cluster in which this poem appeared in the Passage to India supplements of 1871-76. In Leaves of Grass 1881, the final revision is the substitution of detached for a second surrounded in line 7. I think that's significant, and we'll talk about it. An untitled manuscript version in a Washington notebook of 1862-63 is significantly different. There, the spider's symbolic outreaching filaments express the calamus sentiment, the more sexual. The poet's effortless rededication of the published version shows brilliant artistry and impressive sublimation. I think this is one of the more remarkable poems of Leaves of Grass, and now we'll just enjoy it. Hear the rhythms as we're working with this idea of the spider, okay? And noiseless, you'll remember from Eidolons, you'll remember its use in Lilacs 15, you'll remember its use in Outlines for a Tune, Part 2, and then we're going to get, and then as well, Night on Prairie, we'll hear this one last time, noiseless. Spiders, by the way, are only used one time in Leaves of Grass, and it's right here, right now. A noiseless, patient spider I marked, where on a little promontory it stood, isolated, marked how to explore the vacant vast surrounding. It launched forth filament, filament, filament out of itself, ever unreeling them, ever tirelessly speeding them. And you, O soul, where you stand, surrounded, detached in measureless oceans of space, ceaselessly musing, venturing, throwing, seeking the spears to connect them, till the bridge you will need be formed, till the ductile anchor hold, till the gossamer thread you fling catch somewhere, O my soul. Now, the rhythms of this poem are fascinating to me. Notice hear the iambic ba-bum, a noiseless, patient spider, filament, filament, filament. Readers of this poem have always been amazed at the way in which Whitman literally is creating a web-like structure in the creation of this poem. It's quite remarkable. Notice it is noiseless, it is patient. You'll remember this from Song of the Redwood Tree, Part 1. And it is, again, a spider. That, as I commented in my prior lecture, I was focusing there more on Whitman's ability. That's why I love these poems, because you can talk so many different ways about them. There in my lecture, I was talking about Whitman's creative capacity, his inspiration. That is to say, out of himself, he creates these amazing poems in the same way that spiders are able to create out of themselves the filament that allows them to create the web. Notice, I marked, this use of mark is back to this curiosity thing again, where on a little promontory, you'll remember this from Passage to India 3, it stood isolated. Now, this idea of being isolated is fascinating to me. In other words, all by itself. Whitman is that great poet that is all by himself and yet somehow able to connect with all of us. We'll get to, obviously, the work of connecting here in a bit. And then he says it. I marked, to now say it a second time, I marked how to explore the vacant vast surrounding. This idea of exploration. Think about Passage to India and the way this poem uses that same idea of exploration, obviously back to our Homer's Odyssey, right? The vacant, notice our V sounds, the vacant vast surrounding. Then it launched forth. Now, you'll remember this launched forth from 1861, the poem 1861, as well as by Blue Ontario's Shore 20. Go back and look at how he uses this idea of launching forth. And then we'll get hear the repetition, filament, filament, filament. Now, there are readers of this poem that don't like spiders, and so they don't like this poem, and yet, as I say in my previous lecture, as I was speaking to some young students who, many of them detest spiders, I did point out the ways in which spiders are such a remarkable creature, species, the way they're able to send out this filament and thereby to construct this web around them that obviously is not only for their protection, but as well for their sustenance, right? Filament, 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 out of itself. By the way, you'll maybe remember this Mad Filaments use from the I Sing the Body Electric 5, only there, as we said earlier, it was more of a sexual rendering. Ever unreeling, I love that unreeling is used one and only one time in Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. Ever unreeling them, unrolling them. There's, of course, a number of poems that play with the same game, as well as songs about the years that unreel. Ever tirelessly speeding them. This idea that then he's watching this spider send this filament out of itself and creating this amazing web. Notice the balance of this poem in terms of having, first of all, the 5 lines and then a break. And now we turn, making us somehow be reminded of the ways in which Whitman loves to talk to his soul. Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, any number of moments in Song of Myself. And notice here, and you, oh my soul, which will be the phrase at the conclusion of this poem, where you stand. So now we have this Emersonian identification with nature as being somehow symbolic of what? Spirituality. Surrounded, vast surrounding was the earlier line. Detached, this idea of being isolated. By the way, detached is used one time in All Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. I find that remarkable. In measureless oceans of space, you'll remember in Song of Myself 46, he says, I have the best of time and space, was never measured and never will be measured. This idea of being measureless is always going to be a part of our study of Whitman. Oceans of space, taking us back, obviously, to isolated. Ceaselessly musing, venturing. By the way, do know, this entire second stanza, these 5 lines, they don't actually constitute a single sentence. They're rather just a bunch of phrases that are stacked together. In other words, there's no fulfillment. There's no finishing of these lines, which I find works brilliantly with what he's saying in the poem. Notice, he says it, ceaselessly musing. This idea that it's ever ongoing, his quest. Venturing, speaking of quest. Throwing, again, all these ing words, right? Seeking, back to this idea of always looking for. The spheres to connect them. And again, this idea of connecting is central. Excuse me. This connecting, this longing for some connection. We'll explain why this poem ends up in Whispers of Heavenly Death. Connecting them. And of course, from the idea of connecting, we'll catch here in a bit. Till, we'll get 3 of these tills. Till the bridge you will need. Go back to Crossing Brooklyn Ferry and the idea of bridges. Till the bridge you will need be formed. Now, what is this needed bridge? Well, I think it's clear in Whispers of Heavenly Death what's going on here. We're talking about the moment of one's extinction, the moment of one's death. How will one make that bridge? How will one connect? And here it is. You will need be formed till, again, the second of the 3 tills, the ductile anchor. Again, this is the only use of ductile in Leaves of Grass, although in 1855 preface, the word was used one time. Ductile anchor hold till the, notice the fragility of these words, till the gossamer thread, gossamer used one time in Leaves of Grass, it's right here. You fling, catch somewhere, oh my soul. I think this idea of connecting, I think this idea of catchy. I think takes us back to the hugging. All of that has to do with the goal. And what is the goal? Well, I think here, now to get to 2A, we are all somehow a part of nature. And nature is obviously both living and dying. That is to say that not only is imagination, this musing that Whitman is focusing on, this filament, remarkable, as I said in my earlier set of comments on this poem, but there is a deep human longing for connection. And of course, dying is that central imagery of being alone. And yet, I think Whitman wants to make the argument, no, even in our passing, we're never alone. We're always, our souls, our spirits, our energy is always longing somehow for connection, to be with the other. At 2B, I've mentioned the rhythms here, and obviously the symbolism is compelling. The idea of the spider that out of itself constructs its world, as do great artists, obviously. At 3A, I mentioned Emerson, and so we'll come back to him again. Oversoul obviously comes to mind right away with a poem like this. But I also want to point out what a number of scholars have pointed out, that you have a fascinating comparison reading with Oliver Wendell Holmes' The Chambered Nautilus, that poem published in 1858. And I think there, if you go back and study that poem, and we've given comments at learnstrong.net on the poetry of Holmes, if you go back and you look at that poem, you will see there that it's more of a traditionalist poem celebrating faith as being the mechanism whereby one decides, one is able to pass on to the next experience, whatever that is. Here, Whitman, notice, we don't have that, we have faith, but it's a faith in what? Connectivity. The idea that we're all in this project of living and dying together in some profound ways. Finally, at 3B, how are we going to own a poem like this? Well, it's obvious the question, do you share Whitman's hope here for the ability to connect through art, that bridge? And to what degree has reading and studying Leaves of Grass, Deathbed Edition, provided you that bridge? I hope that's happening. Thank you.